And I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of College of Humanities. However, for tonight's event, we have partnered with the EU and the Foundation for Human Rights. And I want to welcome the Ambassador for the EU, Mr. Roland Clear. He keeps on explaining to me how I should pronounce his surname. And this first public event, which the college has worked with closely with the EU, has been a really, really good experience. We have worked with him previously, but not in such a big event. And I have to say that working with the Ambassador's office, and especially Mr. Frank Oberholzer, is in my book an example of best practice for partnerships. He and I decided on today's date, after the Ambassador and I both looked at our diaries during a lunch at the African Renaissance Conference, which was hosted this year in Durban, and which is driven by one of the professors that are here, and is in our school, Professor Howard College. I share the latter with you as I have had numerous questions as to why it is on today, the 27th of July. However, July has now been labelled Mandela or Madiba Month, and we recognise the significance. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the Vice Chancellor and President of the African University, Professor Munashe Furusa, and his wife Saneli, who are with us here tonight. Thanks so much for attending. He's over there. I would also like to acknowledge members from the diplomatic community, executive members and members of our council, particularly Professor Mala Singh, who I've seen over here, deans from the university, and especially deans of the College of Humanities who support me in today's event, and executives from the city, representatives of government departments, NGOs, unions, alumni, staff and students, colleagues from our sister universities, our panelists, of course, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, Professor Patrick Bond, who many of you know, if not all of you know, and he has graciously accepted the invitation to facilitate the panel. Thanks, Patrick. I would also like to recognize a fellow member of the executive of UKZN. I saw her when she came in, Professor Renuka Vita, who's also a member of the humanities in some ways based in education. Hello Renuka, you attend all of our events, so thanks very, very, very much. Tonight, I am supposed to be both a panelist and co-host of the event. Essentially, that to me feels like referee and player. And I was going to contextualize the event in this welcome, but we will see how we continue this evening works out. And I might just do the thank you and, if necessary, answer questions if put to the panel. So that would be my contribution. I also want to welcome and thank all of you for attending not only this event, but many of the past events in the public lecture series on transformation. I'm beginning to recognize many faces. I also want to recognize Professor Paula Zulu, who assists me in many of these events that I do in the college. He is in the college. Thank you, Professor Paula Zulu. I look forward to a productive and meaningful discussion. I think people are saying we have panelists that are well-known scholars, that are well-known in the media, and I'd like to thank each and every one of them, and I do know that we are going to have a productive and fruitful discussion. I thank you.
Professor Potgieter, Deputy Vice Chancellor, thank you very much for these words of welcome and for the opening. And I'm very honored and I'm very keen to say a few words on behalf of the European Union, and maybe starting to explain why we do these things together. with the Foundation for Human Rights and with the University of KZN. South Africa and the European Union have a strong partnership, a formal partnership. We are strategic partners. The European Union has some 10 strategic partners in the world, and so far South Africa is the only one on the African continent, if we leave aside the African Union. We've done this because ever since the European Union and South Africa established formal relations in '94, we have found that many of the problems that we are confronting, and in an accelerated way, I'm sorry to say, are common. South Africa, at the southern tip of the beautiful African continent, Europe at, if you like, the northern tip of the continent. It's not very respectful maybe to say at the northern tip of the continent, but if you look at the size of Europe and the size of South Africa, then we are both relatively small, very small in a way, compared to this whole continent. And both of us, South Africa and the European Union, are confronted with similar challenges of immigration, huge immigration. You see the dramas on the Mediterranean every day now, where thousands of people every month have to be saved, but many hundreds are also abroading. And we both face the challenges of inclusiveness, of immigration, and also of xenophobia. And as a result, there are many things that we discuss. We have 25 formal dialogues between South Africa and the European Union on a variety of subjects, but we are accelerating our comparison of experience on immigration. And the two themes that will be discussed here tonight, higher education's role in transformation for inclusivity in the first place, and secondly, sufficient constitutional and other protections for victims of discrimination and xenophobia, are two issues that are very, very much alive also in Europe. I would like to underline that. And the fora that will be here tonight are people with whom in many cases we have this dialogue. Not only Professor Potgieter, but also the Foundation for Human Rights, today represented by Mr. Hanif Vally, but also the South African Human Rights Commission, the Democratic Development Programme, all close partners. And we think it is important to continue this dialogue and to be open for developments in society. I would like to also say that in addition to, let's say, dialogue, we try to also, in a direct way, support South Africa in meeting the challenges. Although the South African government has many programs itself to do so, I would just like to mention the close cooperation between South Africa and the European Union in the Access to Justice program, which now has funded more than 500 projects targeting vulnerable and marginalized groups. It also has supported more than 100 community-based advice offices. And all these activities are concrete, they are at the grassroots level, at the basis, and they imply that we work together in a direct way. And we think that is important. More in general, the European Union supports a broad range of civil society organizations in South Africa. And I'm very proud to say that this year we had for the first time a full dialogue with civil society organizations in KwaZulu-Natal. And that was a huge success, if I may say so. It was a huge participation, and in fact, one of the colleague panelists moderated that day. So it is very much in the context of Europe and South Africa facing the same sort of challenges in the field of migration, inclusivity, xenophobia, and integrating foreigners in our society. It's very much against the context of Europe and South Africa being strategic partners, But it is also against the background of our development program that we still have running with South Africa, and that concentrates on education, on skills and jobs, and on assisting the government in creating service delivery and in improving service delivery, that we are here tonight with the Foundation for Human Rights and with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. My colleagues and myself are looking forward to the dialogue, where needed, participating in the dialogue, comparing South African and European experiences, and also underlining that many of the things that are happening here in South Africa and the way in which South African society, in spite of all the problems, in spite of all the violence that we have had, is still absorbing large numbers of foreigners, is something that we are looking at Europe in Europe with great interest and also respect. Let me just say to the panelists, I wish you a very productive and interesting evening. I say that also to the public, and be assured that my colleagues and myself will listen tonight with much attention, and where needed we will be happy to participate. Chair, thank you very much.
It's terrific to be here. I'm Patrick Bond, Director Centre for Civil Society at UKZN. We're so blessed with exceptionally eloquent people, and I'm going to therefore not even introduce them and waste time. I'm going to keep them to 8 minutes, we've agreed. 8 minutes, guys. Sorry, there's politicians here that are not going to accept that without listening. I therefore would ask our first panel, which will then be followed by a very quick Q&A. I mean, very, very tight, and we're going to lose the break. Why? We want to maximize discussion and hear the full 8 minutes. And it's going to start with Rama Naidu. Rama, and all of you, give us 20 or 30 seconds about who you are. Why are you equipped to say what you are saying? And Rama's chosen first because we all need to remember what happened starting March 30 in Isipingo. We need to start with some facts about this scourge of xenophobic. Rama.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'm the director at an organization called the Democracy Development Program, DDP. We're in the forefront of the xenophobic attacks in KwaZulu-Natal, and that's the perspective I'd like to present tonight. Yes,
Let's go.
So, what really happened here in KZN? This is where it started, this is where it all broke out. It caught us all by surprise, to most people. We had been working on the ground for 8 months before that, and we knew it was coming. People had talked, people were angry, people wanted engagement with government, and no one was talking to them. And eventually it had to explode. When it did, and we saw the first signs of it, we immediately, as the first organization, sent a memo to the president, to every embassy, to the UN, to civicus, to everybody to say, this is happening, do something about it. We are called alarmists. We said, we can contain this as a city, don't worry about it, we have it under control. It's a small local outbreak. Within 3 weeks, that had spread to almost every part of KwaZulu-Natal. And what we learned from that is that in a time of emergency like this, everything just simply fell apart. No one knew what was happening. No one knew what to do. We had bits and pieces all over the place. And as a result, the fear was fueled, the rumors were completely out of hand. Social media took it to the new level, and we found that the outburst took on a new dimension of extreme violence. It took on a dimension of extreme racism. It divided communities. It divided members of my staff. These are people talking about democracy. And we realized how complex this issue really was. It was not just xenophobia. There were lots of underlying things. And there was simply no space for people to engage and talk about it. And that was the sadness of it. So what did we see? We saw fear and anger of communities who felt they'd not been listened to. It was not about the Malawians or the Zimbabweans and Zambians. It was saying our government has not listened to us. But now, this same government listens to foreigners, puts them in protected camps, feeds them, and clothes them, and we are still starving. Now, how do you argue with something like that? It was their reality. It was their reality, and this really made us think that actually, who were the victims here? Who were the aggressors? What was happening in this situation? And so there were things happening that came under the label of xenophobia, nothing to do with xenophobia. There were tuck shop wars going on in the township. High rates of unemployment. People saying that enough is enough, do something about it. And that's what fueled it. The police, anecdotally of course, did not do enough. Many of them came from the communities and faced the same conflicts that we faced, that we saw in communities, of not knowing which side to stand on, who to protect, the foreigners or local people. And so we began to dissect this thing, and we found that in the refugee community itself, there was a high degree of disorganization, of fragmentation, of each one fighting for themselves. There was no community, no sense of us, no sense of standing together, simply a question of survival. How do we survive in this situation? And that's really what happened. Add to that the political mix that we had in KZN and Durban. The ruling party tried to make the xenophobic march the ANC march. This is what happened whilst people were dying. Whilst people were dying, let's have an ANC march. And we told people they wanted the refugees to leave the camp, leave the women and children, and march through the streets of Durban, saying that no to xenophobia. And they said, but who protects us? What guarantees can you give us? And they said, no, we'll have a big, strong police presence. Up to that time, the police presence had failed. They no longer trusted the police, so it didn't happen. And it was shifting those lines of communication to get the city to begin to understand that this involved every one of us as citizens to do something about it. And that's when the change started to happen. It took almost a month before it came under control. And even now, at that time, promises were made that we know have not seen the light of day. We promised 138 million rand for local economic development, only for local people, not for foreigners, set specifically for them. A task team was supposed to be set up that met every week to talk about this. That task team has never met for the last 3 months. So who is putting a smoke screen? What's really happening? Is there really an intention to address the issue? Or was it something that was orchestrated, something that was left to be what it was? And so I move on to say, what did we need to do at that time that could have been different? The police could have acted much faster to stop it. We asked for the army to be brought in, they came in too late. They couldn't stop it at that time. There was no consultation with local community-based organizations on the ground. The city felt, no, we can do this alone. They took, and I witnessed, they went into a township and said, we are going to reintegrate you into the township. Now really, after this kind of violence, do we simply take someone to a community and say, please take them back? And our politicians were there, making their speeches, and people told them to their faces, get out. We don't want them here. That's the reality. We don't want them here. And for us, the reason is there has not been an open engagement in communities about what this is all about. There's been no space for people to have the uncomfortable conversations. Questions about xenophobia, questions about unemployment, questions about service delivery. The only time people get heard, and I think you all know it, is when tires are burnt. Then it makes the front page news, and the next day the MEC is flying in to be sorted out. So people have learned quite clearly, you know what, you want attention? Do it this way. And what DDP is saying is that over the last 10 years, spaces for conversations have closed down. They haven't opened up. They've been taken over, co-opted by politicians. Ward committees have done that. IDP programs have done that. So where's the voice of the people? What's happened to that? And to us, it's about the connectiveness of bringing people back into spaces where they can start talking about things before they escalate to a point where it spills over into the kind of horrid anger and violence that we've seen in KZN. That could have been averted. And in fact, in places where we worked with communities prior to this, it was the very community that protected the foreigners because they had the conversations. They were able to talk to people and say, this is not what this is about. Don't express your anger this way. They're Africans like we are. We have not heard their stories. We don't know that they traveled for 3,000 miles to come here and left families behind and sent every cent back home to support their child. We don't know that story. So all we did was create space where people could share their stories. Just tell us what it's like to be a refugee, leave your country, leave your home, and come to another country and try and make a living, and then be thrown out of it. On the one hand, we say, we're African brothers, we want you, and the same breath we're saying, we don't want you. And this feeling of despondence, the feeling of desperation, of fear that pervaded that community at that time was really heartrending to us. Because they're saying you want us here, we do the work that nobody wants to do, and now you want to kick us out. You want to take us away. And then they hear different messages. We want to reintegrate you, but the buses were lined up to take people away. People stood outside the camps every night, telling people, go home, go away. And even though we try to talk to people to say, we have plans in place, we have a constitution, we have equality courts, ladies and gentlemen, to people on the ground, that's abstract. They never see those things. They're too scared to go to the people that they think should protect them, are the very ones who they fear. How do you start to address things like that? It's only if we start to look at another model, and a model of reintegration. When apartheid was dismantled, we didn't replace it with something else. We simply used Band-Aids to try and fix it up. Apartheid is well alive in this country. And until we start to reintegrate and think about another model that takes us to a different place, this will repeat in 2 years again. Thank you very much.
One of our most important Chapter 9 institutions, the South African Human Rights Commission. So, Elisa, can you tell us about yourself in 20 seconds, and you have 8 minutes, sorry.
Okay, my name is Elisa Mngxitama from the South African Human Rights Commission, and I'm the researcher in the office of the chairperson who unfortunately was unable to attend tonight, and his focus areas are the focus area of equality and migration. So this is an area that is very close to me and that I deal with on a daily basis. Seeing that we only have 8 minutes, I've had to cut what I prepared cut it very short. But as the Commission, we were asked to speak as well on the constitutional protection and other protection for victims of xenophobia. And we decided to look at protection for migrants as a whole, not just when they become victims of xenophobia. And just to answer Hanif, I wish at these platforms we can actually get to a point where we all come to an understanding of, or at least an agreement of which term is appropriate, because we also find that we struggle, we say non-nationals and it's perceived in a negative manner. You say foreign nationals, that's still perceived in a negative manner. So I hope at some point we can come to some agreement about the terminology. But in as far as constitutional protection is concerned, I think I agree with Hanif when he said that there is sufficient protection in as far as non-nationals are concerned. I mean, our constitution itself speaks that it affords protection to all persons who are in the country. So it makes no distinction, with the exception, of course, of political rights. So it makes no distinction between a person that's a non-national and a person that's a South African citizen. So the right to dignity, the right to equality, the right to the security of a person, not to be treated in a cruel and inhumane or degrading manner, those are all protections available to everybody. And in instances of violence and or xenophobia, I mean, we have at the moment the criminal justice system that prosecutes the perpetrators of these violent acts. And over and above the constitutional protections that we've had, the Department of Justice has acknowledged and realized that it's not just enough to have the criminal, to utilize the criminal justice system as we currently have it. And they've recognized the need to develop a hate crimes policy framework, which also seeks to protect victims of xenophobia and other hate crimes. We also have the Popuda and equality courts, which provide protection to everybody, and this gives effect, of course, to Section 9 of the Constitution. But I'll quickly move to look at the South African Human Rights Commission as an institution that strengthens democracy, and as you mentioned, as a Chapter 9 institution, and what our mandate is and how we seek to protect the rights of migrants in general. I mean, in terms of Section 184 of the Constitution, our mandate is mainly to protect, promote, and monitor human rights of all people in South Africa, and this includes non-nationals as well. Hence, we have the migration and equality as focus areas to ensure that we are able to fulfill this mandate. In dispensing with our monitoring mandate, I think one of the things that become a bit of a challenge for most people to understand is that our mandate, in as far as monitoring is concerned, is that we not necessarily the implementers, but we monitor the implementers. For instance, in as far as the National Action Plan is concerned, that Hanif spoke about earlier, our role there is it's mainly to monitor the implementation of that action plan, and also included in our monitoring mandate, we monitor, for instance, the immigration detention facilities around the country, and then in as far as our protective mandate is concerned, we do litigate where necessary. And in the area of migration in particular, we have litigated against the Minister of Home Affairs. I'm sure most of us are familiar with the Lindela case, which the outcome of that judgment also gave us the powers to monitor the repatriation center in Lindela. And of course, in dispensing with the promotional mandate of the Commission, we continue to do advocacy work in the area of migration and xenophobia through our advocacy unit. I'm not sure how much time I have.
Just 2 minutes.
Okay, in as far as, and then I just want to look at our involvement in the National Action Plan just pretty quickly. As I mentioned, we were initially involved in the drafting, but due to the monitoring role that we have, we've now decided that we should keep our independence and focus on monitoring rather than focusing on being the implementers or in the drafting of the document as such. And we have issued a report, and this is something that the 2008 report on impunity, which Hanif had mentioned as well earlier. And what we realized is that following the 2015 xenophobia attacks, one of the things that we noticed is that the report was not conclusive, because we've noted from the 2015 violence that there's a deeper probe that needs to happen into the root causes of the xenophobia attacks. And in as much as we've received complaints against the alleged comments made by the king, we've decided as a commission that it is important for us to look at the root causes of xenophobia in order to ensure that there is not a reoccurrence in the future. Because as I've mentioned, we've noticed that although we issued a report following the 2008 attacks, but we had incidents in January and in April. So we now shifted our focus to look at what are the root causes of xenophobia, and we're hoping to achieve that through the national hearing, which we're hosting soon.
That's very efficient. Thank you. We'll get us into the next round of questions. Andile, who are you exactly? Does anybody need an intro?
I'm a black person who currently lives in South Africa, and I hope to defeat the white supremacist reality which continued to define our lives since 1652 with the arrival of the settler colonialists. Let me just... I will say some things maybe more elegantly when I talk about transformation of the university, but on this issue of xenophobia, I simply disagree fundamentally with the previous speakers. There's nothing called xenophobia in this country. We have what at best we can say is Afrophobia, is a fear and a hatred of black people by other black people as an outcome of the white supremacist project. We don't attack white foreigners. I mean, Stefano is here, he's very safe in this country, we've never touched him. So I think it's both laziness and part of the NGO discourse which produces paper and language without dealing with the issue. The issue here really, is that, and it cannot be a form of racism, it's an outcome of racism. In South Africa, it's impossible to imagine peace. We kill amongst ourselves, black South Africans, 17,000 of one another a year, more or less. You come from outside Mozambique, Zimbabwe, wherever, you're walking into a slaughterhouse. There is a generalized permanent state of violence in the black ghetto. This is the reality. So if you come and we don't even know you and we have a state that has defined you as illegal as also, I would say, criminal, by virtue of your appearance, not because you've done anything wrong. You are black, you don't have a piece of paper, you are illegal, and we deport you. Of course, we don't do the same with white people. We don't set up borders too. So the point I'm trying to make in a very generalized way is this, that firstly, no black person is protected in South Africa. People talk about protection in terms of the Constitution. Workers demand 12,500 rand, we shoot them and nobody gets arrested. Not only this, today I was here in the Florida Road, I saw a black brother being harassed by white racists, and I felt a sense of total disempowerment on our side as black people. And we are told we are being protected by the Constitution. Yes, the Constitution protects us, but in reality we're not protected. And I think I would rather go with reality, because in reality I know when racism deals with me, I need my brother and my sister to protect myself. I don't think a piece of paper is going to do so. South Africa is racist. The constitution of this country is racist. It protects white people. We are people without rights. You can try this thing. And I want to talk to you in the university situation, where you're professors and doctors and you are black, you face almost the same kind of discrimination. So let me just, Patrick, in conclusion, say we can do some things about this. There is no solution to this problem outside of decolonizing project. We have to decolonize the whole continent, and I think as South Africans we must even say things like we need a 5-year process where the border between Botswana, Swaziland, South Africa, Lesotho, and now when you go to Zimbabwe, it's collapsed. We collapsed the border. Because we did not create the border. They created the border for the same reason of colonization, which I will talk about later, why when they employ you from Zimbabwe and they exclude me, they're creating a black-on-black hatred. We remove the border in 5 years, the sky shall not fall. South Africa also, I think we must make every year budgetary allocation to these countries, in particular to Zimbabwe, because we know Zimbabwe is under imperialist attack. The black people of Zimbabwe are here, it's as a result of attack of imperialism. South Africa must literally, Jacob Zuma, whoever the guy does the budget, say 10% of the budget go to Zimbabwe for the stabilization of that country, because we know why it is what it is. And we have, Patrick, you are an economist, you know, we have 4 trillion rand lying fallow from private capital. Zimbabwe has cash problem. We have 4 trillion rands lying fallow. If we had a proper black government in this country, that money would have been taken and put in Zimbabwe and come back.